Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Rap fire, math evil, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, setting ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of The Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. Hope you guys are having a good, it's Wednesday, right? I hope your Wednesday is going well. And we've got a full course of The Maple Pill to cover tonight. So we're going to be talking about the Bank of Canada increasing interest rates. Spoiler alert, they did do the 50 basis points. So again, I was starting to soften on my position in that regards, but definitely, had you asked me a month or two ago, I would have thought that that was highly unlikely. They're essentially the first country amongst the G7 to do it in this kind of recent round of hikes. So that's an interesting data point for us to look at. We're going to be talking about affordability, Pierre Poilievre. We're also going to be discussing some of the lockdowns going on in China, diving a little bit deeper into that. And yeah, we've got a lot to cover. So let's just jump into it. I'm going to pull up my screen share here, and we're going to get into our first blue pill story of the day. So this is from Global News. Bank of Canada hikes key interest rate 50 basis points for first time in 22 years. So I think I've got it highlighted here, but the last time we saw such a increase was May 2000. So, you know, when thinking about my real estate investing journey, I'm going to have to fact check myself here, but I'm 99% sure I bought my first property in 2010. Yeah. So essentially that was like 10 years before I started getting involved in real estate. So this is definitely, at least in recent memory, an unprecedented incident. It'll definitely be interesting to see how things continue to play out. As well as we discussed, they are going to be easing up on their quantitative easing. So they're going to stop buying more bonds, and we'll see the redemptions not being replaced with new bond purchases. So that's also important to note. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at on the Bank of Canada interest rate front. Let me know what your guys' thoughts, opinions are. Are you surprised? What do you expect to happen next? I think that that's really where the narrative goes now is, do we see another 25 basis points right away? My hot take would be, yeah, I think we probably will. And again, one thing I did want to distinguish is oftentimes I'm talking about the Bank of Canada, and you know, my humble opinion is they're usually doves when they pretend to be hawks, and that's definitely been the case for the last few years. That doesn't mean that I think that that's the best policy for them, right? So I think this round of interest rate increases, you know, removing quantitative easing and other stimulus from the economy, I think that's important because inflation, in my humble opinion, is here to stay for the foreseeable future. So again, this is definitely not a bad policy move. Just I'm kind of surprised they had the teeth for it. So jumping over to CBC News, poor management, new buildings led to Laurentian University insolvency, Ontario AG's preliminary report says. So this is a story we touched upon a while ago. And when the original story broke, it somehow just kind of slipped through the cracks on me. I wasn't aware of it. So I just found it interesting. It seems like this is likely an isolated incident. You know, I don't expect that we're going to see, you know, multiple Canadian universities file for insolvency. But one thing I did want to highlight here, which stood out to me, as of March 3rd, 2022, the university had incurred legal and other financial consultant fees associated with its insolvency of more than $24 million, the Auditor General said in the document. So that to me is fascinating. Obviously, I didn't do a deep dive on this, so I don't have all the facts around it. But, you know, when you're insolvent, the first thing I would immediately do is, you know, incur tons of consulting fees and legal fees to the tune of $24 million. So I got a feeling we're going to see more news breaking on this in the future. We'll just kind of have to stay tuned. But if you guys want a deep dive on everything related to this situation, CBC's got solid coverage here. And just wanted to highlight, you know, from the Canadian Association of University Teachers, they called for Laurentian's President Robert Hatch and all senior administrators to resign following the Auditor General's preliminary report. It is absolutely scandalous that the university leadership used money intended for employee health benefits and academic research for its capital projects and other purposes, CAUT Executive Director David Robinson said in a statement. It then diverted more than $24 million to high-priced consultants and lawyers handling the unnecessary insolvency proceedings, while at the same time demanding staff layoffs and program cuts. So yeah, I think that we're going to see more news break on that $24 million. And hopefully if there are any shenanigans, they come to light. Next from Global News, roughly 1/3 of Liberal cabinet ministers own rental investment real estate, records show. I want to highlight this for two reasons. One, this is just kind of an interesting data point, and anyone that wants to see if there's any hypocrisy going on, this Global News article really does a deep dive into the different members of parliament and specifically cabinet that do own rental real estate, and just kind of, get behind the or pull back the curtain on that. But the other aspect here I wanted to highlight is I think that, those of us that are more freedom oriented, those of us that maybe identify more with whether it's the conservatives, the PPC, or like libertarians or anarchists, I don't think that we want to jump on this hypocrisy too much. I think that members of parliament should be allowed to own rental real estate. I don't think that we should immediately just demonize landlords simply because it's politically expedient, and we can kind of point out the hypocrisy in the liberal cabinet and the fact that they're constantly talking about affordable housing and oftentimes themselves demonizing landlords and real estate investors, while 1/3 of their cabinet, in fact, are or cabinet ministers, I should say, are in fact landlords or real estate investors. So just kind of interesting here. Again, I've shared this with you guys a couple times now. I think that we're going to continue to see more rhetoric coming out in demonization of landlords. And those of you that are real estate investors, you need to really pay attention both to all levels of government and honestly start getting involved in government and policy craft and policy making, because if we don't, who knows? Maybe in 8 years from now, they'll get their wish and you'll own nothing, and they'll demand your happiness. Next, from MSN News, COVID-19 vaccines and national stockpiles starting to expire as uptake slows. This is something that we covered previously as well. We were so fast and loose with our COVID purchasing, right? With our purchasing orders and just stockpiling of vaccines, that we're now giving away, hundreds of millions of, do I have that number right? Or at least millions of doses, I should say, hundreds of millions of dollars in doses, I believe. And we're also seeing 1.5 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines held in national inventory expiring since January. And one thing that immediately kind of jumped out to me, I was like, well, usually with a lot of medicine and vaccines and like shelf life, there is a bit of an extension there. I wonder if they tried to extend any of it. And it turns out, some of this had already had their shelf life pushed back by 2 months. And so we're lapsing on that additional 2-month extension of the expiration date. So again, at a minimum, this feels like a failure in logistics and planning by the government, because, if we're committed to giving away millions of doses anyways, like, hell, why don't we just give away these doses before they expire? And if there's not the uptake amongst Canadians, why are we so committed to our purchasing plan into the foreseeable future in multiple years? Yeah. Again, no one's ever going to nail it perfectly here in regards to supply and demand when it comes to these vaccines, but 1.5 million doses expiring over a course of a couple of months for a country of less than 40 million people seems material. Again, I haven't done a deep dive, but if you guys want to, link to this story as well as all the other stories in the video description down below. Next, jumping over to global news, China's oil champion, I don't know if it's pronounced as an acronym or just CNOOC, Canuck, prepares retreat from Canada, US, UK over sanctions fears. And the big thing here, I think, is not necessarily just this one country doing it, but seeing whether this becomes a standard operating procedure for a lot of Chinese multinational corporations or entities that are, deeply embedded with the CCP in China. Ties between China and West have long been strained by trade and human rights issues, and the tension has grown following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which China has refused to condemn. So again, we'll have to see how this all plays out and whether this is an isolated incident amongst just a, natural resource play that the Chinese company or CCP have invested in, or whether this is actually just the tip of the iceberg and we start to really see China, pull out of a lot of, whether it's the Five Eyes countries or NATO countries or similar sort of entities. So let me know, have you guys seen other stories about this stuff? This is the first one from China that really had hit my radar. And next, this is going to bring us into our first red pill story of the day from Space in Toronto, the horrible lies of Pierre Poilievre's real estate lessons. And I'm not going to lie, when I saw this on Reddit, this definitely jumped to the top of my I need to read this to see, what are these horrible lies. And I gotta be honest, it feels like a bit of a stretch, especially that word horrible lies. Essentially, this is a pundit taking, issue with some of the ways Pierre Poilievre frames a lot of his complaints about what's going on with monetary policy and housing and the cost of housing here in Canada, and to a lesser extent inflation, primarily just because this article is focused on housing. And it really takes aim at a recent political campaign ad that we're seeing with Pierre in front of this, tear down and discussing how expensive it is. And essentially, I think literally it's like 900,000 just per unit cost of land in regards to the purchase of this $4.8 million property. If you were to put whatever that works out to, 6 units on it. So again, this is worth reading just if you want to really understand where the other side of the aisle is coming in regards to this. And, some of the complaints here, I think, have more validity than others. The idea, will Pierre Poilievre be able to just immediately, if he became prime minister, curb stomp or bring to heel the central bankers and the Bank of Canada? Probably not immediately, but again, to think that there's not influence going both ways in that relationship, I think is also naive. And, even government's budgets and signals like that signal to the Bank of Canada and other players, essentially the expectations of the federal government or the prime minister's office. So just wanted to kind of highlight this, but also wanted to bring out this one point here. It's also worth saying that Poilievre would never countenance policy measures that might actually dent the affordability crisis, like taxing the capital gains on principal residences and using those funds to build housing, making massive investments in co-op housing, clamping down on real estate industry's conflicts of interest, or bringing back the somewhat dubious tax credits that financed so many affordable rental apartment buildings in the 1960s and 1970s. And so there's actually a lot to unpack here. This is primarily the solution that this individual gives or prescribes to actually try and fix housing. I can tell you that I personally don't believe that a capital gains tax on principal residence is going to make housing more affordable. What it's really going to do, in my humble opinion, is restrict individuals' ability to move, right? So if you have to give the government a cut of your house every time you decide to relocate as a homeowner, it's going to really disincentivize the desire to upgrade or downgrade your living accommodations. And that's actually just going to result in, less inventory. And even more important than like the inventory argument here is just the idea that it restricts the mobility of Canadians. This is not a net benefit. This idea that, we'll tax it and then we'll use that to build affordable housing. If the issue here was just throwing money to build affordable housing units, the government would have already done it, right? We already throw billions of dollars every year at this. And when we look at the actual, cost per unit, whether it's subsidized or like completely built, the cost the taxpayer, it's not a good return on investment here. And again, these are all Band-Aid solutions. Monetary policy, in my opinion, is the only long-term solution if we're actually serious about both getting inflation as well as the housing market to return to normal. Again, maybe that horse has long left the stable and this is all useless kind of debating in an echo chamber. But again, if nothing else, that headline definitely grabbed my attention. I wanted to share it with you guys. Next from the Toronto Sun, Trudeau is planning a tax on trucks. And I think this shouldn't surprise anyone, right? I think we maybe even covered this briefly already. But what I wanted to highlight here is how many people seem to be making this a rallying cry for the blue-collar worker or the average family man. The proposed tax would cost an extra $1,000 on a Ford F-150 or $4,000 on like a 3,500 Ram. And while certainly, that is going to make transportation costs more expensive, this is more just illustrative of where the government is in this day and age, right? Like they believe that their job through policy is to try and tweak all your personal preferences in order to align with like their desired results, right? And so there's honestly not a a policy or prescription too small or too big that they wouldn't happily make in order to force you, right, whether it's carrot or stick, into doing exactly what they want, right? So, okay, we want everyone to own EV vehicles. We'll just ban it by the year 2035. But between now and then, we'll tax them more, right? We'll incentivize owning EVs. We'll essentially subsidize, the building of gas stations or electric charging stations across the country in order to all nudge the average Canadian consumer in this direction, regardless one of whether that's like what we actually want as a country or what the individual wants. And again, the smallest minority is the minority of one, the individual. And yet it just seems like constantly from statists and collectivists, that lesson is very quickly forgotten. But if you want to understand more about this truck tax, link in the video description down below. Next, jumping over to National Post, liberals are infecting our military and police forces with wokeism. We will all pay the price. What the government is determined to fix is not the military's capabilities as a force, but its lack of social justice. Yes, and this is definitely an issue, whether we're looking at, the Canadian military or the RCMP, things of that nature, or the U.S. military. And I don't think it's going to get better. We're going to have to see such a cultural shift before the Army course corrects in this regard that I think we'll see a massive purge. And whether that purge is like literal, as in, people being fired for not being willing to carry water for the wokest agenda, or whether it's simply people choosing to opt out, right? Like they choose not to apply to the military. They choose not to join. They decide to, move on from a military career earlier than they otherwise would have. I definitely see a lot of that occurring. It's also something that we see, often coming up in discussion around police forces, right? At this point in time, I honestly don't understand why any sane person would really want to be a police officer when, you're constantly demonized, but also you're essentially expected to enforce public health policies, right? And these draconian measures that, again, seem to infringe upon any sort of basic understanding of individual freedom or liberty. And it really doesn't pay that well. And it actually is, a bit of a risky job. So I think that we'll see a lot of sane actors choose to opt out of like policing careers or military careers. And I think this article does a decent job of just highlighting some of those concerns. And just a couple of highlights here. Blacklocked just reported on testimony from the Commons Human Resource Committee that RCMP applications have plummeted sharply. The testimony was given by the head of the Mounties Union, who has a vested interest in the size of the force and use social justice language. But we should still give serious attention to his claims, including policing is no longer considered as an attractive career as it used to be. Police services across North America are seeing a decline in applicants. Yeah, and I think we covered this previously, but at this point in time, it feels like the police are more there to protect criminals than they are to really protect the public. And I totally get why it would be a undesirable career choice. Again, I just don't understand anyone that would want it in this day and age. I think policing, like soldiering, used to attract mostly serious stoic applicants willing to endure hardship to protect order against chaos. But if so, those professions are unlikely to appeal to social justice warriors. And if only SJWs need apply, you'll wind up with an inadequate pool of unsuitable applicants trickling into institutions that spectacularly fail to deliver either on their ostensible mandate or on social justice, becoming instead dungeons whose occupants are in no mood to live together, let alone do their jobs, under leaders unfit to inspire them to do either. Yeah, well, that definitely is kind of a scathing take on it. I don't disagree whatsoever. And let me know your guys' thoughts. Are you a police officer? Are you in the Army? Did you used to be? Are you thinking about joining now? And if you are, I'd love to hear the rationalization. Maybe the goal is to change, the system from within. But the more I learn history, the more I look at our current institutions and administration, the less convinced I am that we can actually fix what's going on from the inside out. Definitely, I lean more and more to a whole cloth or a start over sort of strategy. Next, the Toronto Star, Justin Trudeau calls Russia's war on Ukraine genocide. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Russia's attack on civilians in Ukraine should be seen as genocide, but NATO and Canada must avoid sending in troops to prevent a broader international war. Honestly, it feels like there's a real dichotomy here in the rhetoric coming out of a lot of Western politicians, particularly in North America, whether it's Joe Biden talking about essentially regime change, whether it's Justin Trudeau talking about genocide. We've also got an article here from about Chrystia Freeland. Did Chrystia Freeland just commit Canada to Russian regime change? The deputy prime minister said Vladimir Putin must be vanquished. Did she mean it, or was it empty rhetoric? And the bigger question here is, if you start to demonize your opponent too much, you leave almost no option on the table but regime change, right? If you're literally going to compare your enemy to Hitler, if you're going to claim they're guilty of genocide, if you're going to claim that essentially that there's no way things can return to normal without them being replaced, and that's what we've heard multiple times now from, powerful pundits as well as politicians in the West, you leave no other option. And this arguably, really will just force your opponent to entrench and double down on their course of action, right? If, like, in my opinion, if Putin sees no other option but to either win or to, have to eventually give in, if he believes there's no way they're going to leave him in charge, if he believes that they're going to try him in an international court as a war criminal who committed genocide, again, just understand that I don't see what motivations would be in place there. Now, the argument sometimes from the left is, or from policymakers, is that this will force the citizens to overthrow their government. And maybe it plays out that way. I'm just, I'm doubtful, I guess, at this moment in time that that's actually what we're going to see play out on the international stage. And I think that we need to be very careful because, again, if you force Putin into a corner where he believes that there's only two options available, either winning or his death or imprisonment, I think he's going to double down on the option for winning. And that feels like that would kind of mean that there'd be almost a line too far that he wouldn't cross, which feels like, we'd almost be egging on a broader international conflict, which is what a lot of our politicians tell us they don't want. But I'm just not sure their actions always are in alignment with it. And again, I think that at this moment in time, I guess personally, and this is just my hot take, and again, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions, it's hard for me to want to 100% believe anyone, right, on either side of the equation here in regards to what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. Until both sides agree to a fact, it's just like, I'm like, to be determined, right? Even things like footage and, some of the items we're seeing coming out in the Western press could be manipulated or massaged, right? Like, we also need to understand that at the start of this conflict, a lot of Ukrainian prisons were opened up, and a lot of those convicts were given a choice, right? Like, hey, here's a gun and fight for your country, or, you can stay in prison. And a lot of bad people see these sort of conflicts and greater chaos as an opportunity to cause further chaos. And I guess I just believe right now the West is so excited to point the finger at any and all wrongdoing as being at the foot of Russia that it makes me think that they'll regularly jump to conclusions. Now, again, that doesn't mean that Russia doesn't have a vested interest in portraying itself a certain way on the world stage as well. I've got no doubt if push comes to shove, Russia cares more about Russia than they do Ukraine. So again, I'm not saying that they're incapable of the bad things that are being, accused. They're being accused of. I want a lot more facts, a lot more details before I'm really ready to commit to, there's no option but regime change, because I think that has serious consequences to geopolitical affairs. Next, Spencer Fernando, the laziness of calling everything populism. This is a story that we kind of highlighted yesterday in yesterday's kind of special episode, but I did want to highlight it because I really do agree with what Spencer Fernando lays out here. Note, and I think this is a big thing to consider when we see the demonization of populism. Note who doesn't get labeled a populist. To get a sense of how the use of the word populist has shifted from being descriptive to being a political cudgel, consider who doesn't get labeled a populist. And again, it used to be that populists didn't necessarily have the same negative connotation, but I can't help but believe that in part it's due to where politics is today, right? A lot of politicians see themselves as technocrats. A lot of administrators are technocrats. And so they believe that they should have these powers to wield and enforce their belief system, right? They believe that they're in the right. And so the only way to fix the world or fix their country is if everyone just gets out of their way. And I think that that's why we see things like populism right now being demonized. It's one of the reasons that, I'm okay with people constantly bringing up that quote from Justin Trudeau about how much he respects China's basic dictatorship because they can get shit done. Because I think he's being very honest. I think that was a moment of candidness that we rarely see from politicians. And I think it just really betrays or showcases their true beliefs, right? Like, they don't actually care what would be populist. They don't care what the average person wants. They care about the dogma that they believe in. And, they're desperate to ensure that they get to enforce that upon everyone else. Next, from Glenn Greenwald, Western dissident from U.S. NATO policy on Ukraine is small, yet the censorship campaign is extreme. And this one's really worth reading cover to cover. Most of the stuff Glenn Greenwald does always is, but really wanted to highlight this one. Preventing populations from asking who benefits from a protracted proxy war and who pays the price is paramount. A closed propaganda system achieves that. And this really is what we're seeing play out right now in real time, right? You're not allowed to question who benefits. You're not allowed to question, relationships of powerful American politicians with Ukrainian oligarchs. We're not allowed to question, the last 20, 30 years of Ukrainian history. We're only supposed to look at this isolated moment in time and draw all our conclusions based upon just the last, 6 or 8 weeks. But want to highlight this one point here. But what was unprecedented just 6 weeks ago has now become commonplace, even normalized. Any platform devoted to offering inconvenient to NATO news or alternative perspectives is guaranteed a very short lifespan. Less than 2 weeks after the EU's decree, Google announced that it was voluntarily banning all Russian-affiliated media worldwide, meaning Americans and all other non-Europeans were now blocked from viewing those channels on YouTube if they wished to. As so often happens with big tech censorship, much of the pressure on Google to more aggressively censor content about the war in Ukraine came from its own workforce. Workers across Google had been urging YouTube to take additional punitive measures against Russian channels. And I think, this kind of highlights the imbalance in incentives here. The people that are super woke, that want to see, Russian punished and Russia bad, Ukraine good, they've got a really strong motivation here to push for these sort of changes, right? In this normalization of censorship. Whereas people that are more, free thinking, open to as many sources as possible, I just don't see the motivation as being as strong for them to fight back against this. And I think that this is how we see, freedom of speech and liberty die a very slow, protracted death. So yeah, again, really encourage you guys, spend some time, read this entire thing, but wanted to finish with the wrap up here that Glenn shares. This war has been very good indeed for the permanent Washington political and media class. And although it was taboo for weeks to say so, it is now beyond clear that the only goal that the U.S. and its allies have when it comes to the war in Ukraine is to keep it dragging on for as long as possible. Not only are there no serious American diplomatic efforts to end the war, but the goal is to ensure that does not happen. They are now saying that explicitly, and it is not hard to understand why. The benefits from endless quagmire in Ukraine are as immense as they are obvious. The military budget skyrockets. Punishment is imposed on the arch nemesis of the Democratic Party, Russia and Putin, while they are bogged down in a war from which Ukrainians suffer most. The citizenry unites behind their leaders and is distracted. Yeah. This definitely feels, at least like, if not a manufactured situation, it's one that they're going to use to the fullest benefit, right? And really appreciate Glenn Greenwald calling them out on that. And now switching gears, getting into our first Black Pill story of the day from Blacklock's reporter. It seems like a lot of our Black Pills come from them these days. Fed commissioner blunders names government whistleblowers. So, yeah. I read that wrong. I missed the comma, but Fed Commissioner blunders names government whistleblowers. So Public Sector Integrity Commissioner Joe Friday has named names in a massive breach of confidentiality under his own act. The commissioner mistakenly released 2,324 pages of records detailing whistleblower investigations at the Canada Revenue Agency. And now, could this just be sloppiness, right? Could this just be an accident? Absolutely. But at the same time, if you wanted to really crack down on whistleblowers, particularly in the CRA, this would also be a good way to do it, is accidentally dox them. And that's literally what what our government did. So again, this is worth reading from cover to cover. You guys really should be supporting Blacklock's reporter with a paid subscription. Again, link to this article in the video description down below. Next Black Pill also comes from Blacklock. Spent $326,000 before midnight. And I'm not sure if you guys have been exposed to how the public sector often operates, but when it comes to governments and budgets, there's really this perspective of if you don't spend it, you lose it, right? And so there becomes this double incentive to make sure you spend all the money you get, allocated in a given year, because next year they may reduce your budget. But secondly, who knows what next year holds anyway? So you want to maximize the spending, even if that's kind of front loading certain expenses to try and, give yourself more breathing room in the next fiscal year. And that's exactly what our Treasury Board did. So the Treasury Board in a March Madness spending spree burned through $350,000 to mark the end of the fiscal year, according to Access to Information Records. The annual ritual sees managers spend unused budgets for fear of losing their parliamentary appropriations. Records detail Treasury Board spending prior to midnight on March 31st, 2021. Cost totaled $325,000. The largest expense was $7,200 management training course, the smallest a 90-cent Zoom charge. And so the article goes on just to highlight some of the different choices when it comes to spending. And again, the usual suspects, right, of like buying gift cards and things of that nature, so that essentially you can, take those resources into the next fiscal period. I'm not sure, I haven't spent enough time on the subject matter, so I know I don't have a perfect solution here, but there has to be a better way than the way our government treats our tax dollars. There just has to be. I don't want to live in a world where this is the most efficient way to go about implementing the administration. Next from True North, Waterloo School Board refuses to review age appropriateness of K-6 sex books. I know this is sometimes a complaint I get from individuals that watch, the Maple Pill, or just, are subjected to my political views, is like, man, you bring in a lot of like American examples of wokeism and things like that, especially in the culture wars and related to schools and indoctrination of children. And yeah, I do, because I think that Canada is just a little bit of a laggard here in regards to implementing, the trans agenda, critical race theory, and other sort of like Marxist ideologies. And wanted to really highlight this one because here's an example right in Canada. And it's important not just to like understand the fact that they don't want to address age appropriate, learning for children, but really the exact language that was used here by the trustees. So trustees refused to support the motion, with 3 voting for it and 6 voting against it. In her opposition, trustee Karen Meisner called the motion quite harmful. Age appropriateness is often used to question the identity of Two-Spirit or LGBTQ plus people. It's actually quite harmful because it suggests that folks that identify as Two-Spirit or LGBTQ plus themselves are not age appropriate. This is actually a phase used to undermine the humanity of those folks, claimed Meisner. So just understand, and like with where we're going with hate speech right now in Canada, very soon we could see whether it's unintended consequences or this was from their playbook day one. Very soon, the idea of even asking questions about like, hey, is this age appropriate to teach children, could very soon be thought of as hate speech, right? Those are the analogies that they're drawing right now. Very soon, you could find yourself, penalized, fined, ostracized from society, potentially even jailed for hate crimes. Again, if we continue to see different bills like there's so many at this point in time, C11, C18, C36, I think are some of the most concerning in regards to restricting Canadian free speech. And this stuff should be very concerning. Like, if you've got young children, you need to become involved in their education one way or the other, whether that's homeschooling. I personally think that that's the ideal solution, or like pod schooling where you and locals get together and you've got your own pods, or whether that's just you becoming a trustee on the school board, whether that's you joining the, the parents association at your local school. You need to make sure that you and like-minded individuals have a say in your child's education, because if not, the state's going to force their dogma, their policy, their worldview upon your children. And not only are they going to do that, they're going to demonize you in the process, and anyone that's a thought criminal or thinks differently as well. So again, really appreciate True North for covering that article. Next from the Counter Signal, Stop the Treaty, Who Allows Brief Feedback on Global Pandemic Treaty. And this is worth doing your own deep dive on, but understand that right now the World Health Organization is essentially hell-bent on implementing a global pandemic treaty that would be in place by 2024 that, again, would see essentially like this continues to move us in like a globalist agenda, a one world order sort of perspective of like, oh, now the WHO would just be able to dictate if everyone agrees to this treaty, right? What sort of policies we implement under future pandemics. Hard pass. No, thank you. Because again, if we saw every country agree to this, we'd all be experiencing right now lockdown similar to what's going on in China. If the WHO and the World Economic Forum and all these other big acronym organizations head their way, countries like Sweden and states like Florida wouldn't be allowed to be anomalies. We wouldn't have them as data points to actually argue or counterpoint the lockdown narrative, right? The mask mandate narrative, we must live in constant fear and constantly push out fear porn about this pandemic. So if you guys want to understand a little bit more about that, link in the video description down below. Now let's switch over and talk a little bit about what's going on in China. And there's just some crazy ass footage coming out. Some of this footage could be older. Honestly, it's so hard these days to know what's 100% legit and what's not. And like I mentioned, if you guys want to go on your deep dive on Twitter, there's all kinds of just like alarming, terrible videos of, children being isolated from their parents, pets being literally abused and killed and euthanized. And again, not in like humane ways at all, right? Like people literally taking like sticks and beating your dog in your own home. That's an actual video making the rounds right now. But this one really just stood out to me when you see these individuals sticking their head out of like a tiny hole, right? Like this, honestly, like a lot of livestock is treated better than this. A lot of livestock is treated worse than this too. Don't get me wrong. Don't freak out, PETA, but this is why. So again, for all I know, this video could be old. It could be from earlier in the pandemic. Honestly, I don't care. This is just a hard pass. Nope, not interested in that at all. And I'd like to believe that my line in the sand would have been way before I found myself in one of these pods with a hole just big enough for me to stick my head out so that I guess I can, get the occasional breath of fresh air while I look left to right and see dozens of other people sticking their heads out. Like, this is just wild. And this is the reason why we constantly need to be willing to bring up the slippery slope, right? Because that's where we live as a society, constantly at the risk of slipping further into tyranny. And without people speaking up, we probably will. Building upon this story from Feast Stories, China shows yet again that communists have no respect for life. As we've seen time and time again throughout history, when individual rights are undermined, the group is inevitably hurt as well. Remember, the smallest minority is the minority of one. Anyone that disagrees with that doesn't actually care about minority rights. And again, just like whether it's the whaling coming out of the cities, there's a link to that video there. People being isolated because of COVID. Again, it's wild. If you guys want to spend a bit of time going deeper down the rabbit hole here, I encourage you to do so. Jump into that story and get into our clown pill story of the day. I found this really interesting. This is from Clown World Today on Twitter, and essentially just highlighting BBC News. So again, this was BBC World, and from when was this one? This one was the 7th of April. Shanghai residents running out of food in COVID lockdown. Residents in Shanghai lockdown say they're running out of food. But then we've got BBC World Services, and this came out April 11th. Why China's zero COVID policy and Shanghai's strict lockdown is in everybody's interest, according to epidemiologist. Sometimes words just don't work in my mouth. But anyways, again, it's just fascinating. And there's something that really hits you over the head. The fact they use the exact same photos, right? And, this photo here, I think, is also very telling. That it essentially shows what you would think is the government giving out food to residents because they're in the back of the truck and they're piling up food. But there's a bit of a dichotomy here in what the headline says and what the photo shows. I gotta say, if what I'm seeing coming out of China right now is in everybody's interest, turns out I don't give a fuck about your interest. I only care about my interest, and my interest is not living in that hellscape of a world. Now, another clown world story. Vancouver is one of the least affordable cities in the world, and the Postal Service considers it too dangerous to deliver mail. So this is in regards to safety concerns Canada Post brought up, and they suspended service to certain Vancouver neighborhoods. At some point, Canada's going to have to stop pretending the social decay occurring isn't turning systemic. So, yeah, definitely we live in the clown timeline. If you're literally seeing, the most expensive city in the world also has like no-go zones for our postal services. Either our postal services are soft and weak, or, social decay is real and systemic in Canada. And I actually want to hear from you guys. Do you live in Vancouver? Have you spent time in Vancouver? I've never visited Vancouver, so I can't really cast the first stone here. But what's it like? Is there actually no-go zones, whether it's because of like homelessness, crime, things of that nature? And if there is, like, what is the exact cause of it? And is real estate still crazy expensive in those no-go zones? Or is Canada Post essentially just wanting a nerfed world? Let me know your thoughts and opinions and your personal experiences in that comment section. And now let's switch gears and get into our first white pill story of the day. Watch, MP says misinformation on Ottawa protests spread by media and government. Lloyd said he finds it interesting that despite his total lack of evidence, the media and the members of the government are still trying to spin this tale that there were all these firearms in downtown Ottawa. And this is important because way too often we see just mainstream media, politicians, the administration be able to point to experts or, insiders with insider knowledge tell us this, or, police sources indicate. And essentially that's what we saw here in the narrative, right? Whether we're talking about the alleged arson that was originally, used to demonize the truckers, and it turns out, they weren't involved in any way. Whether it's in regards to firearms, and I believe it was Justin Ling wrote an article saying that police sources had informed him that, loaded shotguns had been seized from the Freedom Trucker protest in downtown Ottawa. And yet when Dane Lloyd was actually requesting the interim police chief of Ottawa tell us, did you guys find loaded firearms, loaded shotguns at the Freedom Trucker convoy protest? The interim police chief does everything he can do to not answer the question in a direct manner, right? What seems or feels like it should be a yes, no, right? Instead, it's like, well, we haven't pressed any charges yet. And it's like, no, like that wasn't the question we asked, right? And I really do appreciate the fact that Dane doubled down here and essentially forced the police chief to spell it out and admit, again, without being 100% clear on it, that, loaded firearms weren't seized during the Freedom Trucker protest. But it was interesting, essentially, how Dane and I assume his media team put together this video. If you haven't watched it, I think it's 6 or 7 minutes. I encourage you to spend some time on it, particularly if you didn't see this when it originally broke, because it feels like it was a few days ago that we highlighted this, but this is a bit of a deeper dive into it. So again, check out the Western Standard here if you want to go down that rabbit hole. Next white pill story from Brad Mills. This is actually talking about Azteco. Not sure if I pronounced that right, but essentially they're a private Bitcoin service in Canada. And so what this allows you to do, it's not cheap, so it's not perfect, but if you want to get KYC sats, right? If you want to participate in the Lightning Network, it's an interesting approach they've got. I haven't personally tried it out, but Brad Mills breaks down how to do so here. But you get a QR code from ast.co at PayPoint or /PayPoint. Step 2, you go to one of the 6,000 post office locations and pay with cash or debit card. Scan the LN URL QR you're sent. So essentially, this is your Lightning node URL, and use sats privately on Lightning. So again, this is a way that essentially anyone can go and buy non-KYC Bitcoin, my understanding is, at any of the 6,000 post office locations. So I'll be trying this sometime in the next week or two at the NESTOR Falls, postal office, and it'll be interesting to see because I imagine I'll be the first character to try so. But it seems like it should work, so I look forward to trying that out. And again, anything that brings more availability for Canadians to participate in Bitcoin is a net benefit, in my opinion. Again, this has an expensive fee, so I think it's like a 7.8% total fees. So not cheap, but compared to like a Bitcoin ATM, probably not that different. And a lot of Bitcoin ATMs these days are actually KYC, if I remember correctly. So next white pill. This one came up kind of last minute, so it's not actually in the links in the video description down below, but you can find it on David Anber, his personal Twitter. The OCDSB just sent an email to parents informing them of the new trustees issues mask mandate. As suspected, and this is not legal advice, they don't seem to have any way of forcing a student to wear the mask if they and the parents defy the mandate. So, white pill sometimes are relative, but I'm going to chalk this up as a white pill because it's nice to see the school board essentially saying like, yeah, it turns out we can't actually force you to mask if you and your parents don't want to, but we'll try and do our best. So what happens if a student chooses not to wear a mask? Where a student is refusing to comply with the masking requirement, parents, guardians will be called to either assist in helping the student fulfill the masking requirement or to apply the exemption or apply for an exemption to the masking requirements. And while it seems tedious bureaucracy to have to apply for a mask exemption, if you're a parent and your school board's trying to force continued masking on your children, get them out of that school, ideally, or at least get them an exemption so that they don't have to wear those face diapers. Having your children participate in this charade is only going to further deteriorate their trust in the system and everything, in my opinion. I also think it's going to lead to a lot of learning disabilities or stunted, arrested development in children as well. So that's just my hot take on it. But yeah. And while I know I could see the argument that like, hey, if it's going to make my child trust the system less, I should force them to wear a mask. Don't put them through that child abuse, in my opinion. And then finally, let's do our meme of the day. So transitory. You said no more inflation. I said no, comma, more inflation. And that literally is pretty much what our government is doing to us on the daily right now. It is like, I saw someone break it down on Twitter. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find it quickly, but let me actually see if I've got it here in my likes. If you guys want to follow me, it's Matt McKeever 85. Yeah, I thought this was perfect, actually. So this is from Cameron Winklevoss, but inflation broken down by month and reason. 2021, October, 6.2% transitory. November, greedy corporations at 6.8%. December, 7%. Supply chain bottlenecks. January, 7.5%. Supply chain bottlenecks. February, 7.9%. Oil prices. March, 8.5%. Putin price hike. What will they blame next? And that is actually probably, the billion-dollar question right now is who will they find to blame next for inflation? Because we know that politicians are never going to look inward. Central bankers are never really going to admit how they participated in this, the greatest generational transfer of wealth we've ever seen in the history of humanity, right? The rich getting richer. And again, there's nothing wrong with them getting richer. The reason that this is wrong is because the deck was so stacked unfairly against the average person, right? Large corporations were deemed, what's the terminology? Vital, right? Or whatever, necessary. And that's not the right word, but you guys can let me know in the chat. And a lot of non-essential and essential businesses. That's what it is. So again, when governments are choosing favorites by choosing who's essential and who's non-essential, that's not a fair playing field whatsoever, right? They're literally making sure that the big corporations win. And that's the biggest issue we're seeing play out right now is like the entire gutting of the middle class, of the small entrepreneur, the solopreneur, the individual that was blazing their own trail. While the internet has been a wonderful leveling playing field, at the same time, we see the government doing everything they can do to make sure it continues to tilt in the multinational corporations' favors. But anyways, enough of me ranting on. Let's jump into the chat. I really do appreciate when you guys make this a two-way conversation. If you guys like what I'm doing here on the Maple Pill, consider smashing that like button, hit subscribe, all that good stuff. We are at 1,000 subs already, so I appreciate that to everyone that has subbed. If you want to check me out on Instagram, it's Matt McKeever Unfiltered. That's the account where I post all my shit posting memes and stuff like that. We've got P58. Hey, everyone. We've got Bite Hunter second. Free faster. Prime is now 3.2%, and variable rate mortgages are around 2.5%. Still free money. Yeah, absolutely. Still very cheap, especially on the grand scale of things, right? If you look back even like 20, 30, 40, well, I guess more than 20, but like 30, 40 years or further, This is some crazy ass cheap debt that's still sloshing around there, but I do think it's going to continue to get more expensive. Just how high is yet to be seen. Benjamin, what's up? We've got Bang in the chat. Free Faster, roughly 0/3 of liberal cabinet ministers have an economics degree based on how they responded to things that is obvious. That's funny. I don't know if that's factual, but that definitely is funny. Chronic chills, rising interest rates, government intervention, taxes on assignments, 2-year ban on foreign investors, flipping taxes, etc. Government should have stayed out of it. Now with the added restrictions, they may actually cause a crash. Yeah, there's a lot of policies being thrown at the real estate market all at once, and there's lots of large macroeconomic occurrences going on in the global economy as well. So, I definitely wouldn't want to have to be weaving the needle or the thread at this moment in time, because it is a very complex system. I do agree with you, though, that there is a lot of different policies. Some of those policies I don't think will have massive impacts on the real estate market. But again, who knows what will be the straw that could break the camel's back in that regard. Free Faster, capital gains tax on primary residence equals more reluctance to sell, less supply, higher prices. What a dumb idea. I agree. And again, to me, the biggest threat there is actually the restricting the mobility, right? Essentially, anyone that wants to be mobile will be incentivized to become a renter, which will, at least according to the narrative we even see mainstream media and the administration pushing these days, will create a lack of security amongst that, grouping of the population. Or we'll see people with huge sunk costs in regards to buying a property, because they'll risk not being able to replace it with an equal property, because if they end up having to pay capital gains on any increase. And understand that, again, maybe there could be an argument for capital gains tax. Again, I'd rather see no taxes, but maybe there could be an argument made for capital gains tax if we had sound monetary policy, right? But when you've literally got the Bank of Canada, when you've got central bankers aiming for 2% inflation, that's inherently already a tax where your money becomes less valuable. But it means any real assets you own naturally inflate based upon that, plus what other factors are driving the price points. But essentially, you go into this game knowing that it's stacked against you, and then to add on capital gains to that is just so wrong, in my opinion. What's up? We've got HE, the Hungarian Experiment, in the chat. Actually got a notification today. That's wonderful to hear. Free Faster says, let's tax trucks so that contractor bringing the equipment to build more houses has to charge a higher price for those homes. That ought to lower housing prices. Nope, try again. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of unintended consequences when we're thinking about government policy. And I don't think government should be involved to this level of minutia and trying to fine-tune policy to incentivize or disincentivize us in our individual purchasing and consumption habits. I straight up don't think so. Again, if you want to try and educate people and show people why electric vehicles are the way of the future, if you want to show them why participating in a more restrictive form of transportation, I just don't know what else to really refer to electrical vehicles as. Again, so be it. You educate till your heart's content. But to, tweak policy to such an extent, again, this is the same issue that I brought up, I think, last week when we were talking about the budget. There's this issue of the government never actually going back and clearing out old rules, regulations, laws. And so we end up with all these crazy, there'll be a rebate for this and a tax on that, and then a surtax, and then a discount or a credit. And it all just creates for more bureaucracy, right? More middlemen, more red tape. None of this is a net benefit for Canadians. Chronic Chill says, all of this problem literally began from printing free money and idiotic lockdowns. 100%. Those are really, that's why we're here. That's why we find ourselves in this moment in history. Almost like intended havoc. It certainly feels like if you want to cause chaos, they played a lot of the right cards, I guess is what I'll say. This country is too far gone, says Hungarian Experiment. Yeah, I look forward to when you're back up here, Peter, and chatting, because I'm flip-flopping these days, but honestly, either more of us Canadians need to start speaking out and, voting with our dollars and our actions, or I just need to come to terms that maybe I don't want to be a Canadian. Maybe it doesn't mean what I always thought it meant. And if that's the case, let's figure out a way to set up a base in a country that is more in aligned with our personal views and, our preferred means of government. And essentially, that which governs least governs best, in my opinion. Crenny Babe says every more this government makes is designed to cripple Canadians. Klaus Schwab is so proud of his minion Trudeau. And again, I have no idea if it's a grand conspiracy where everyone's involved or whether a lot of these people are just vapid, empty, soulless individuals that just want to be patted on the back by their peers. And so they're just a herd of sheep as well. And it's just one or two shepherds that are leading them astray. I don't know, but at a minimum, they are definitely complacent. Exactly, all part of their twisted, idiotic, psychotic plan. Yeah. Although, did you guys see there was I think a Newsweek article headline that came out that said study shows Bitcoiners are psychopaths. So, now I kind of think it's cool to be a psychopath. I'm so conflicted. Saw so many of my Bitcoin heroes saying that they now identify as psychopath or their pronouns are psychopath. Terry says, totally agree with you about the kids. No political grooming. 100%. Let's at a minimum get the schools to prove to us they can teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, and then we can consider other courses or lessons, and all those should be optional, and the parents should be fully informed about what's being taught in the school system. This idea that your children aren't yours, they're the state, should be so concerning to every single person that understands even an ounce of what that really means. Trudeau wants to put truckers in those cages. Honestly, if he had his druthers at the peak of the hysteria around the Freedom Trucker Convoy, I wouldn't put it past him. Terry, I've seen videos from Turkey where live dogs are thrown into a garbage truck. World's fucked up place. Agree. Basmatic says crime. I live in northern Saskatchewan. Crime is out of control. They do not report on it because releasing the names of people involved is racist. If that's true, that is very concerning. And again, that's definitely something we've seen from the American press, right? Is, the moment, you essentially can tell what race a mass shooter is because they'll either tell you immediately or they won't tell you. And when they tell you immediately, we both know why they tell us immediately. And again, when it doesn't fit their narrative, they'll try and find any other way to frame it, right? So when we saw that one was a mass shooting at I think it was a synagogue, right, in Texas, and they framed it as British man attacks. And you're like, oh, well, this must be a Johnson or a Smith or another British surname I'd expect to see. And you're like, oh, that wasn't the British surname I was expecting. Terry, I was laughing today as CBC explained the school board mask thing system is so scared that it makes them do dumb shit. This applies across the board. Agree. Back to global warming. Yeah, let's get back to climate change and fear mongering around that. On to your next panic attack. What's up? We got Project LB52, my business partner, Dan in the chat. Check out Space Monkey Fight Club for a custom-made for you song, just like Matt's intro song in a unique avatar. Yeah, and if you guys aren't familiar, there's a link in the video description down below. As well, Dan also is the one that put together the Mailbag Monday song that, honestly, whenever I think of it, I'm going to be thinking about it for the rest of the day. It never leaves my brain after that. Graham says, this government is too far gone. I'm banking on collapsing under its own tyranny. Yeah, and I hope that if that is the case, I just hope that we can have kind of a controlled demolition, right? So that we can try and minimize collateral damage and things of that nature. But it is really hard. How would you reform something this bloated, this big, this corrupted? I don't see how to easily accomplish that. But maybe I'm just a little too black-pilled on that. But anyways, appreciate you guys hanging out with me on Wednesday night. Hope you enjoyed this episode. And we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Reminder, we are on Rumble and BitChute as well. It's taking me a little bit longer to upload them these days because I don't know if it's my internet or whether it's their websites, but my uploading speeds are way slower now on those websites. And what ends up happening is I start uploading, it takes hours, and then I forget about it, go to bed, and then wake up the next morning. So I'll try and create a better system so I get uploading them more consistently there, because my bad, but I don't think they got uploaded yesterday's episode until like 5 p.m. Today, because I literally started doing it last night, forgot about it, went to bed, didn't look at those tabs again until 5 p.m. Today, and I was like, God damn it. So anyways, appreciate you guys, and we'll be back tomorrow, and we'll play Dan's outro song for us. As well, I'm going to be putting together a full-length video for this song, because right now you guys are just hearing I think the first like 30 or 40 seconds of it. The whole thing I'm really proud of and enjoy. So look forward to sharing that with you guys in the near future. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Web fire, math, able scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if